Welcome to another episode of SJS Recommends. Today we will talk about Kotoko by Shinua Tsukamoto, an experimental Japanese filmmaker who has a pretty big body of work, and this is my favorite film from him. I've seen 6 films in total, so I have lots of blind spots with him. I've seen the first 2 Tetsuo films, then Killing, then Snake of June, and then Gemini. And Gemini and Kotoko are my favorite ones. But I'll do a plot synopsis to this film now. So it's about a young woman who has like double vision, and she has lots of hallucinations, and she hurts herself to kind of try to stay kind of in touch with reality and to feel alive and things like that. And she's also a mother. She has a young baby, but the baby is taken away from her pretty much in the beginning of the film. And then she also meets this writer guy, but I'm not gonna go into it anymore. I don't want to spoil the whole movie. But I think this is like a good example of Tsukamoto's style. It has lots of handheld camera work. It's low budget. It's very intense, very psychological. But then again, Tsukamoto is a director who has tackled with lots of different types of subject matter, doing like boxing movies and samurai movie, and so lots of different genres. So in that way, you cannot say that he has like a particular genre that he always does, because he's a pretty versatile filmmaker. But stylistically, it's very typical for him, I would say. And it's a pretty challenging film as it is, so off-putting visually, and also there are lots of very upsetting scenes, and also probably should give a trigger warning to people who have experienced lots of like maybe mental health issues in their lives, or maybe they have a family member who has schizophrenia or something. You might find this film too upsetting if you have those kind of personal experiences. And again, even if you don't have that, it can be a very upsetting film, but we will get more into that in a bit. So now I will ask Altaz what he thought of this film.
So, what I thought about this film is there's so much I can understand. Well, I could feel a lot of what it's about, and even some of the things you're talking about in terms of being putting in terms of the kind of the more visceral elements, the more kind of almost body horror-ish elements, and none of that put me off. I did have a few. I do have some questions about the film as a whole and the approach. And since I'm not familiar with Tsukamoto, it'll be kind of really great to kind of discuss with you some of the questions I have, because I want to kind of see from your perspective, you having seen some of his films, and how you see it. But there are things that I really connected with, and then there are things that I didn't quite connect with. So I'm a little bit ambivalent on this one. But I do think that yes, it is a good film. But I myself haven't fully registered it, to be honest.
Well, that's gonna be interesting, as this will be a bit of a different discussion, as we haven't had this type of thing happen before, at least to this extent, I guess. And hopefully I can answer some of the questions. Yeah, hopefully. It's obviously a difficult film, so yeah, and it will be
Yeah, and
hard
it,
to talk
and it's
about it.
great for two people who have social anxiety to have such a discussion, because it makes both of us uncomfortable.
Yeah. Fortunately, I don't have any hallucinations. So yeah.
Yeah.
Even though the first time I watched Twin Peaks, I thought I was so paranoid that I thought I would start having hallucinations, but fortunately I didn't. But anyway,
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, like Kotoko to me felt very real. Like I could very much relate with a lot of the kind of episodes, like you said, like not necessarily the hallucinations, but I think there's so much that's viscerally correct about episodes. Um, that you can have in terms of breakdowns or burnouts. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting discussion. I am looking forward to it.
And I could also say that I've known a couple of people who have schizophrenia during my life. So as a kid, we had this family kind of friend who was in his early 20s, like really nice guy, and I was friends with him, and he was friends with my whole family. And but he had schizophrenia. But when he was in medication, he was like a completely like your average person. But then sometimes, obviously, the people who have schizophrenia, they stop taking the meds, and then they start having these episodes, and then they often might have to go to a mental hospital for quite a while, and then start taking the medication again, and then eventually they'll get back to society. And then also more recently, my mother knows a guy with schizophrenia, but he's also like a very nice, very intelligent guy, but then has these problems. So yeah, it's like very sad to see when you see, like I've seen like really good people with this like very difficult
It
mental
absolutely is.
illness. So it's really brutal. And also one more thing, as my mother is a psychotherapist, she has worked with people like this who, for example, hurt themselves and who
Mhm.
have these severe problems. So I've kind of heard about these things from my mother as well. Obviously, not about any particular person, as she has the like a patient privilege thing or whatever it's, that she shouldn't tell about the patients. But I mean, very generally, I've heard about these things, and I know both of us are very interested in psychology in general, and I've always been very interested about like these kind of very severe mental issues and things like that, like schizophrenia. But yeah,
Mhm.
so that's some personal context to the film. And of course, there have been like many other films that tackle this subject. Probably the most famous one is A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe,
Mhm.
and that was a film that I used to really love. Now it's maybe a bit too sentimental for my taste, but I think
Mhm.
it's still a good movie. And I think I even wrote an essay about it on high school when we watched it on English class or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, now it's the topic is going too much like like into a different direction, so we should go back to Kotoko. So yeah,
Yeah. So I guess we this is the spoiler-free part that we discuss usually, and then we try to say who would you recommend it to. So um, I don't I don't know. I mean, because I think one of my concerns or questions really would relate to that, because I can see a kind of interest in this film for more of that kind of aesthetic and like the horror elements. And I think that that's the thing, that in this film you have two very significant things happening. One is a harrowing drama uh, of immense struggle, uh, and then you have to depict a state of mind, an approach that a lot of people obviously enjoy in the genre of horror films. So you're bringing it together, and you're bringing it together to create empathy, uh, and understanding. And I think one of my questions really is that, does when an audience member sees that, will it translate to them? You can't guarantee something's going to translate, but for the most part, given what it is it going to be watched for that, or is it going to be watched for some of the intense or weird imagery, some of the surrealistic imagery, some of the dark comedy, and the blood? And that's why I'm like, the reason I'm bringing up here, who would you recommend it to, is because I have a question about that. Because and I think the same thing can happen in a Lynch film too, right? There's a lot of people that get attracted to it for the quote unquote weirdness of it, the strangeness, the out there dialogue, the intense events, and all that. And then in a way, it's a form of entertainment for it to be weird, when maybe the filmmaker is trying to communicate something more empathetic and visceral and stuff like that, that just gets completely lost on majority of the audience. So that, that is one of the things that raised the first kind of question for me when watching it, and why it's difficult to say who would you recommend it to, because you could easily say to someone, oh, you like horror films and you want to see something different, a little bit different, oh yeah, this, you'll find this interesting. But that to me sounds like such a almost insulting thing to say given what it's about.
Yeah, those are really good points. I would say that for myself that I gravitate to this film because I have an emotional connection to it and I
Mm,
feel empathy towards this person and people like
mm,
this in general, especially as we still live in a world where mental illness often isn't taken seriously,
mm,
even though it should be taken as seriously as like physical diseases like cancer and things like that. So I definitely feel that emotional connection to it, and I think many other people do because I've read quite a few reviews about this film throughout the last couple of years, and I think at least like cinephiles have that emotional connection to it. But then if
mm,
you show this to a quote unquote normal person, they will probably think of it as a horror movie. And yeah, I was also gonna say that yeah, you could recommend this film to people who like maybe Tsukamoto's other films for the craziness and the weirdness, and also who like Takashi Miike or Sion Sono or these other very transgressive Japanese filmmakers. So you can recommend it based on the horror weird aesthetic and the blood and everything like that. And I guess many people will see the film as that it's shock value and
mm.
it's horror and it's handheld camera work and that kind of those kind of basic things that it is on the surface. But like I said, to me, it's more than that.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, same. I think there's so much in there that, and we there was a recent Criterion Closet video, and I forget which lady's name who was in there, and she was talking about, in cinema sometimes you should be able to see yourself on the screen, and I could see myself, uh, especially with some of the struggles she has as a result of suffering from that illness. So I guess, and that's why I'm like, I wouldn't say in any film, especially that you recommend, that I would say, oh, I like it, don't like it, as we were discussing before. I don't operate, especially with your recommendations, I wouldn't, because I know that they're coming from someone who's very empathetic, sensitive, intelligent, has great interest in art and all that stuff. And so now it's more about the dialogue, because I'm not sure, because sometimes our responses to a certain piece of art or is really our personal defensiveness too. So maybe it was so real. I think that's another thing too. That was it so real that it actually terrified me, to the point where you almost feel a defensiveness about it, like that being out there and being seen for like that kind of, the like you said, shock value and entertainment, and oh well, isn't it funny to see someone, I don't know, come to someone who's, slit slit their wrist. I don't think this is a spoiler anyways, but someone who slit their wrist and they slip on the blood, like that kind of intensity, I think, is a form of realism, but it is also a form of humor. And then you're like, well, if someone just chuckles and haha, isn't that just funny, and then he slips on the blood, and you almost feel a protectiveness about it, which is wrong. But I guess what I would say is, I can't stop anyone from watching it the way they watch it, but I would feel that, don't just watch it, and for that alone, and see the humanity underneath. And I think that's what can transform the movie. But another thing is the relentless pace as well. So because the relentless pace maybe doesn't allow you in that space always to feel that humanity, because you're going at this relentless pace, because the perspective is about the internal experience of the person. Um, but anyways, those are more things I want to discuss. There's quite a few questions I have that I'd love to get your perspective on.
Yeah, maybe we should start the spoiler discussion now, and I'm gonna answer what you were just saying as well. But I think we are already getting into this type of territory that requires spoilers, maybe a bit. So,
Yeah.
so again, people, yeah, it's hard to recommend this type of movie to kind of lots of people, but yeah, again, watch it if you want to watch it, and if you don't. But yeah,
Yeah,
but I
and I would
know,
say too, I think you should. I think people should watch it. I actually don't wouldn't say, oh yeah, don't watch it and all that. But like you said, with caution, if people are squeamish and all that, it'll easily offend. It will offend you within the first 5 minutes. So you have to be prepared for that because it's a very challenging film. It challenged me. So it's a challenging film, but I would not say don't watch it, and I would not say it's not a good film. I definitely wouldn't say that, but I feel like it's a challenging film. It's a very challenging film.
yeah. So now spoiler discussion starts. So I'm now gonna answer or add to the things that you were saying a couple of minutes ago. So I think important point to say about this kind of the horror element of this film is that I think that like the horror isn't just again shock value. It's not just there to give you cheap thrills, but again the Kotoko's life it's full of horror. So we need if we want to understand her
Mm,
life, we need to see the horror because her whole life is horror
mm,
because she sees these hallucinations and double vision. She constantly thinks that people are coming after her. And of course, we know that many people who have schizophrenia, they kind of have these maybe conspiracy theories sometimes, and sometimes they think that, oh, the government might be after me, or the aliens, or something can be. They think that they are like very important. So it's kind of like an egoistical
mm-hmm,
um, illness in that way that you think that you are part of something really big and people are interested in you and are after you, even though that's not the case. But she sees again everybody who comes to her as a threat. She sees them double. So I think the horror is very much needed for us to understand what she's going through and actually to build up the empathy in us for her. I think if they didn't show these horrible scenes, we wouldn't connect to the film emotionally as much.
yes, I agree with you. Um, so this is what's really interesting because when we see these visual imagery and the seeing double and all that, um, it's easy to just look at it as what we know is the most common illness that's associated with this schizophrenia or paranoid delusion and all that, and you think about a very serious mental illness. But I think mental illness, since it ranges, even some of our daily anxieties are reflected in the imagery. So if seeing double, for example, like when you are, yeah, when you've had trauma, you have anxiety, you all these kinds of things, any kind of pain creates a kind of double vision in you because you don't know if you can trust the authenticity of a person because you're so vulnerable and you're so wounded. Who you let in can have such uh, consequences in your life, and on top of that your ability to make that distinction is very distorted. So you're in a state where you're all wrapped up in this pain, and it creates a form of tunnel vision, right? Where it's like, this is all there is to my world, right? And then it creates all these trust issues. But yes, if you are having literal delusions, that makes it amplifies it like by 1,000. So I can fully understand what Tsukamoto and Koko together, they wrote this and all that. So I'm like, there, I can't say this isn't people that don't get it or haven't experienced it themselves, as in the case of Coco. the one question is that I guess my question is really almost like a Godardian, you know, essay film where you start concentrating. How do you create empathy? Is empathy about showing you the internal mental experiences as accurately as possible, or is it about something else? Because in one way, this film is very educational. If you are someone who suffers from that kind of shame and delusion like you do, that's all there is to me. I'm a bad person. I'm not worth anything. You're self-harming. You're all that. For you to understand what that state you're in and that doesn't reflect all of you, uh, you maybe need a little bit of a wider lens. But if you just want to talk about the experience itself, you take a narrow lens. So I feel like this film took a more narrower lens. It went and said, look at her going through this episode and all that she's experiencing and how harrowing it can be, how terrifying, how confusing, how disorienting. And I totally get that. But at the same time, I'm wondering, could the lens have been widened just a slight bit? So like some great music, you have great intensity and then you have almost a respite to to see the lens wider, that like you said, that this is more of a being trapped in your ego as well a little bit because of the illness. So that you know that's one of the things that I kept struggling with. Should the lens have been a little wider? Should there have been a little more change in pace?
Yeah, I guess it could have had more of that space with if they focused a bit more on her family, for example, because those moments are a bit like kind of our escape from the horror, and we see
Mm,
her as something else and not just the illness. We see that she still cares about her child, even though she has this awful illness, and we see how she interacts with her family, and that gives us some space and gives us some perspective on how, and I think it gives us more empathy towards her, that we see that the illness isn't her whole persona, but we see that she is something more than her illness, and she
mm,
would probably be a good mother and good person if she didn't have that illness. But I'll also go back to what you were saying about kind of how this film is so relatable for somebody who has anxiety. And yeah, I was starting to think about that because I can actually relate to many of these things, even though again I don't have hallucinations and I don't have schizophrenia. But as we talked about this actually last time in our after talk, that how due to our trauma and anxieties we can see
mhm,
or we can feel that some people when we walk in the streets, that you look at them differently, at oh, that person reminds me of this bad person from my past, and
mhm,
so you start seeing them as threats. So kind of
mhm,
like Kotoko in this film, she sees everybody as threats. So even if you have social anxiety and trauma and anxiety in general, you kind of have that double vision in a way that you see two different versions of an actual person. So there is the actual person and who they are like, and they are not a threat, but then you have your own perception of them and your own version of them, and that you see as the threat, even though they might actually not be the threat. And I think there's one point where Kotoko kind of thinks that, yeah, maybe I shouldn't go outside because all the problems start outside when
mhm,
she starts seeing all of them double. So maybe it would be easier for her to stay inside. And obviously that you can relate to as an anxious person as well, because you know that at home there's nobody here. I don't have to be fearful of anything. I can just be at peace at home, and then that can become a cycle, and you don't want to go anywhere because you feel safer at home. So yeah,
mhm.
there are these lots of these things that an anxious person can relate to, and I think that kind of widens the scope of the film as well when you stop just thinking about schizophrenia and you start thinking about mental illness in general.
Yeah, and even the part about her doing something and then moving, and that's also a common journey, no matter what level of challenge and struggle and emotional struggles you have in your life. because it applies to everyone. It's always the idea, okay, I did this, I messed up, I'm gonna move and start again, and then you're only gonna repeat uh, the same thing, because you can't really truly run from yourself, or you can't truly run from certain situations of the world. And so in this film, I was really caught up in trying to ask myself at times where my frustration is rising from. Is it the film, or it's the reality? And that, to me too, was difficult, because I was thinking, yeah, a lot of my frustration is about the reality as well, right? Because it's that there's no, right, she's obviously struggling, she's obviously in this very difficult situation, and there's no help. And at times I would sit there and say, why is there no help for her? Like, why doesn't people see that? Oh, why doesn't the family see that? And why doesn't the, right? But then when I thought about it, I'm like, that's actually true. If you've actually gone through stuff in your life, you could be going through really, really intense things. And yet, to other people, they don't realize the intensity of what you're going through. So, in a one way, I really want to applaud this one, because I'm like, that intensity level at times is correct. Like, I can relate to the, even that moment where she's trying to cook and she's trying to calm her child, and a part of you is frustrated at the fact that, yeah, yeah, okay, let the child cry for a bit, just finish what you're doing. But how many times maybe I've experienced in my life that sort of, you know uh, uh, meltdown, right? Because, as we've discussed, one thing I learned about myself is that, I may be neurodivergent, and I might be on the spectrum for autism. And, one part of that is getting meltdown. So you start getting really busy and you're doing all these things. And what you need to do is step back. And in that scene is so powerful, where she's just cooking, and she's just thinking, I got to get this done. Let me just get the cooking done and it'll be fine. But it's not going to be fine. So it's a very intense film in that regard, because you're kind of frustrated at her, but then you also realize that it's just all too human what she's going through. So it can be heartbreaking. So it's really difficult.
And what you said about like she not getting help, I think that might be a maybe wider commentary about Japanese society, where I think mental illness is stigmatized
Mm,
way more than in Western society, and obviously in a very um, kind of community-like society where individuality is frowned upon. People might think that, oh, if somebody says that they are depressed or have mental illness, that, oh, you are too self-obsessed and just get over it and just fix your life. So I think that might be a big part, at least in Japanese society, and it's still in Western society as well, even though we've kind of moved forwards in these issues and started to consider mental illness more carefully and things like that, and in a better way. But yeah, I think that there's that at least. And then what you said earlier about empathy, that like, can we feel empathy with people like this, and where does empathy come from? And I think, again, as we people are often very self-centered, in a piece of art, you always have to have like a small part of yourself in a way to feel empathetic for
mm,
somebody. So if the film or the story doesn't have anything that you can, it doesn't have anything that you can relate to, then you might not be able to empathize with it. So there's need to be that kind of small spark of something that you can get a grip of, and then you start feeling empathy. But then if the whole experience in a film is completely alien, then it might be harder to feel empathy, even though in the end empathy should be about, like, again, being able to understand people who are completely different than you, not just understand people who are similar to you, but also who are different to you. But I think in the end, as people are flawed, we always need that small touching stone of relatability to feel empathy.
yeah, you're absolutely right. And as you were speaking, And this is why, yeah, I wanted to discuss with you, because often I get more perspective once I'm talking to you and I'm thinking about the film. And so I can kind of see, all right, not to look at the film by what it's not, but where its focus lies, because no one piece of art or film is trying to do everything. It has to pick a piece of where its focus is. So I can almost see this exploration as equivalent to a Van Gogh, where Van Gogh was painting to show his perception to us, what it might look like inside him. And it feels like, so Tsukamoto was likewise, except he's not the one experiencing it, is likewise working with Coco to maybe paint so people can understand. And like you said, if there's intolerance in this society for this illness, there's no empathy, it's seen as these ways. To break those conceptions, he's taking the task of, let me paint this for you, but in live action, what it looks like, so people can understand. If you had no control over this and this happened to you, should you be judged by your actions? And one thing I will commend Tsukamoto on this is he's very aware, because by creating this character that reflects him, Seitaro, who is the novelist of the book Bullet Dance, which is we know Tsukamoto has a film called Bullet Ballet, so clearly it's him. So he is representing that I'm trying to be empathetic, but I don't fully understand, and in a way I'm being a voyeur. So I appreciated that sensitivity he had, that when we try to explore these things and we go to try to understand, are we trying to create empathy, or are we just being voyeurs? We just want to learn about kind of how messed up the person is or whatever. Are we attracted by the mess, or are we coming from a place of love and empathy and care? And he leaves that ambiguous, because Seitaro is a character we basically don't know if he was ever there or not. But he's attempting to show extreme empathy, but maybe he was just there as a voyeur. And I felt that he was asking that question, and was aware of that himself, that by him doing this and not being the person experiencing it, like Van Gogh was, is he being empathetic, or is he being a voyeur?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. It's actually very interesting, and I think we can now, as viewers, start thinking about ourselves when we think about him that way. That do we watch these types of films just to be shocked and again have thrills like we talked about in the beginning, or do we want something more? And why do we actually why are human beings so attracted to misery and illness? Why do we make so many films about mental illness, and why do we have fun at these people's expense, you could say?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of, yeah, it also makes me think of like what Haneke, who Tony hates, has talked about in his films about like our desensitization to violence and things like that, that we are so desensitized to misery and we are so attracted to misery. Why is that? Especially when the reality often is misery as well. So although I'm kind of, at the same time, I'm glad that we are attracted to misery and not just some bubblegum entertainment escapism. Obviously, it's important to watch these types of hard films, even though life is misery as well. But I'll add to this as well, because we were just talking about kind of Japanese society and mental health being maybe stigmatized and stuff there. But I was starting to think about this wider analysis of this film, that maybe this is about what Japanese society is to many people in general, that when you go outside where the modern life is so hectic, so intense, there are so many things you have to consider. There are so many threats and so much uncomfortability, so many things that are uncomfortable. so many things that you're unsure about and again uncertain about. The future is often very bleak these days, as like these normal things like getting a job and having a family, everything is getting more and more difficult now. And again, society is so intense, so maybe it's actually a wider commentary on Japanese society, and this kind of micro level plot actually tells us more about the macro and not just the micro. So I think the lens can be widened if you think about it that way. So.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And now I can understand that what maybe I was feeling was exactly maybe one of the aims is to almost feel that, well, not almost, to feel the injustice, to sit there and say, how can no, if someone's suffering to this level, how can there be no one there for them? And like you said, and that connects with, well, how self-absorbed we are, um, the frantic pace of life, the basic concerns. We don't have concern for anyone who's slightly outside. Like, I mean, just think about like the education system, right? If you have strained resources, for example, and there's a student who needs a little bit extra, they can't have that extra. You just leave them to fend for themselves and figure it out. And maybe I think that was what was upsetting me too, because it does hurt a lot to see that act, you know, to see that happening, right? Because her child is taken away and put with her sister. She goes and visits her child, but at no moment are they really thinking about her. So the child is put to protection by being put away from her, but no one's really thinking about where her well-being is. And what's really heartbreaking is that the child was the one thing that was really positive for her, right? But at the same time, she was a threat to the child. So I don't think the film, I guess, yeah, the film is really good in that way because it's not sentimentalizing either. Like you said, when you're talking about Beautiful Mind, like some of those films can get a bit sentimental, or they just look at that one thing as the ultimate savior. Oh, because I have this child, that helps me out of my mental illness. Well, it doesn't, right? It's a source of light for her, but it's a source of some of our anxieties too. Am I going to end up harming this child as I'm suffering from this? Which then creates extra stress, and the stress leads to that whole cycle of further delusion, self harm, and all that kind of stuff. So, um, yeah, you're absolutely right. Mm.
And I'm glad that I was just reminded of one very important thematic thing about this film, which is that you can look at this film kind of like we often look at Eraserhead, that Eraserhead is about the fear of becoming a father. So this can be about the fear of being a mother. Because when you have your child, you are always afraid that something is going to happen to your child. And you are always
Mm.
so manic that, oh, what if I hurt my child? What if somebody else hurts my child? What if somebody happens in the environment? Because there are so many things in modern environment that can happen to a child. They can get hit by a car or a bicycle or motorcycle, or they can fall off from a building or whatever. So there are these constant threats to your child when you are a parent. So I think the film is a lot about just being a parent and how hectic and insane it can be, and how much fear and anxiety you can have when you are a mother.
Yeah, and
And I
it's
think
also. Go ahead, please continue.
and I'll go to the ending of the film actually now, because she's kind of at peace in the ending, you could say, in the mental institution. So, and she's very emotionally distant to her kid that's now way older. So we see her at peace and very distant to her child. So that's kind of tells us that now that she is more distant from her child, that she's now at peace. She doesn't have to uh, be afraid anymore. So we can kind of start thinking about that maybe all the anxiety and the mental illness came from her becoming a mother, because now that she's more distant, she's
Mm.
kind of at peace. Although, of course, she isn't like healthy in the end either. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is kind of heartbreaking, isn't it? And that at the end of the day, it's like detachment is some sort of a help, but it's not the answer, maybe either. But it is those nice moments that you do see that from the beginning, one of her spites is singing and her and dancing and her kind of doing that in the rain and stuff while in, that shows that actually she has a space to do that. And in a way, she's away from that world of shame and self-hatred and self-loathing and self-harm, um, but she might also be in this um, numbed state too. Yeah, I guess you're right. I think there's no simple answer, and it's very, very, very complex. But yeah, we got into the themes because I sort of had all these burning questions that we didn't really get a chance to even talk any of the aesthetics. But I will say that I loved the opening scene uh, where it's like in front of the ocean, and it's like this peaceful scene, and then all of a sudden there's just a scream, and the lens and the color changes, and it really articulates well what it is to have struggles of the mind, because how your perception can just change. You could be in the most peaceful scene, but inside uh, the reality changes, or that you can experience pain in very beautiful places, which we've discussed many times.
Yeah, we could talk about the aesthetic a bit generally now, and then maybe go a bit back to the themes after if we have something more to say about them. But so this like aesthetic in general is something that I normally would hate. I don't usually like this type of handheld
Mm.
stuff, but I think it fits this movie perfectly due to the subject matter. As obviously it wouldn't fit this film if it had like methodical Tarkovsky light shots. Yeah, it wouldn't fit the film at all. It needs to be like intense and handheld and kind of very. The camera needs to be there in the action. It needs to be very personal. And I think there are of course these scenes also when she's like watching TV and turning it off, and then there's that one moment when there are these soldiers and it's like an intense
Yeah,
moment. So I was starting to think how those scenes also are are part of the theme, the kind of societal theme that everything is so intense now that there are constant news about war there and soldiers there and why child has been kidnapped and killed and things like that. So because we now
yeah,
live in this type of world where we get this negative information fed to us all the time,
yeah,
and obviously it's gonna destroy your psyche when you hear about all these wars, because back like 100 years ago and more, like you were kind of ignorant what was happening in the world if you were a normal person and you didn't know about these awful things, and then you could be more at peace when you didn't know. But now that you know everything, it's really horrible, and I think something we people can really relate to, especially now in the social media age and stuff.
yeah. I'm really glad you brought this up because it actually does connect with so many of the things we were discussing. This whole news thing. One is the question, I guess, when you were also talking about Haneke. It's like, how can you call this person, quote unquote, crazy, and look out there and not see that basically everyone is? So what is sanity and what is insanity? Um, the second thing is, like you said, the desensitization. There's all this violence and horror around you, and again, the news being a source of, is it a source of empathy or voyeurism? And to be honest, most of us feel it's a form of voyeurism. You learn about these wars, you learn about violence, you learn about, I don't know, poverty, you learn about these things. And what is it? Is it's almost just for a form of entertainment, or where you just talk about, oh, isn't that sad that, oh, people's buildings are getting bombed, and look at the people getting killed, and look at this illness, and look at that. And it's like, is that empathy? So that element's in there, and then the third being that being a source of a trigger for her too. Someone who's struggling, as we all know, like people who struggle with any kind of challenge, whether it's depression, any kind of challenge, that the one thing that they're often advised is just shut off the news for a while, because the news can be a form of like anxiety provocation, or if you're already experiencing challenging thoughts, to get the negativity bent that it's used to get stories more viral, get people interested, can actually have very negative effect on your well-being. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because that definitely was an important theme in the film. You could always see the always where she's sitting there, and then the news story and all that, and what's going on in the news, and the reality and surreality all blending together. And yeah, very, very, very poignant that.
Yeah, this is a bit off topic, but I think news in general, it's obviously a very much a double-edged sword, because I, for
Yeah.
example, again, as somebody who studies politics and stuff, I think it's very important to like
Yes.
follow these things and not be ignorant, and actually know what the people in power are doing and things like that, and what is happening in the world. But at the same time, I often notice that how it affects my mental health, especially
Mm.
in social media, when you also like, in addition to the news, see like people's comments on the news and all the hatred and bigotry and things like that. And when you see
Yeah.
it every day, it like really messes with my head. And sometimes I think that yeah, I should maybe take a month off from following this stuff, but then I just cannot do it, as I'm at the same time very interested in this stuff. So it's so hard, because you need to be informed, but at the same time it's destroying your brain. So yeah, it's very difficult with
Mm.
this.
Yeah, it is. It is difficult. Absolutely. And I agree. I too follow, because I think, yes, it's important. Two things, and which you already know and do, which is you follow what's going on, and then you try to critically think about what's going on as well, not to just take a headline as a headline, but also, try to think about the headline and what it means. And I think, again, that also can also mean empathy, because it's like, look at these poor people in this, situation here in the world. I don't think it's as simple as that, because in that sense, even art house, I often felt like, well, that can be a form of voyeurism too, right? If you're very elite and you're all comfortable and all that stuff, and then you're watching, you know, any art house film, and you're like, oh, look at that, the immense loss and the tragedy and all that, and it doesn't transport in any way into your life, doesn't change anything about your life. What are you really doing but just being a voyeur? And I think even the greatest filmmakers had a big issue with that, or questioned that. I'm going to put this on screen, but how is it taken? Right? Are we being voyeurs, or are we trying to express or create empathy or grow or think or whatnot? So I think all that relates, and I can see in their discussion as well that, yeah, I guess like you said, I think the aesthetic threw me off with the fast cuts, and the, like you said, I don't like it either. Uh, but yes, it's important to understand what disorientation feels like. You don't know what's up, you don't know what's down, you don't know who's a threat, who's genuinely there to give you care and acceptance, and you can end up harming people who are actually trying to give you care and acceptance. You can shut them out literally as well. Um, but at the same time, you can also see her struggle, where her self harm is also a way of seeing, why do I still want to live despite the fact that my life is so brutal in a way? Wouldn't it be better if I'm not there, kind of thing? But then I still want to live, and I still want to go on, and I still want my child back. So that, those conflicts. So, but yeah, I think, yes, when it was moving really quickly and all that kind of stuff, it didn't even allow me at times to really process what, you know, I'm feeling, which, but I did sense that the film was expressing a kind of uh, reality that's important to understand as well.
Yeah, I'll say a couple more things about the news thing, because I
Yeah,
started
please do.
thinking about it. So So I think now that again we are responsible for the things that we do, but in a way we are also responsible for the things that we don't do. So I think, for example, the philosopher Peter Singer has talked about how your average person is in a way very evil, because even like your middle class person could easily put a bit of money into charity, maybe skip that one restaurant meal a month and put $20 into charity and save a child's life in Africa. But most of us don't do that because we are so desensitized about those things. Yeah, it's horrible, but then we don't do anything about it. But then also one more thing is that, of course, with news, we know that bad news sell the best. So we often have to remind ourselves that many things in the world are actually getting better. So people might know, for example, Steven Pinker from the Harvard psychologist, and he has, for example, written a lot that these books that, this and this and this and this thing are getting better, like infant mortality and things like that. And poverty has reduced in many places of the world. So many things are actually starting to be way better than they used to be. Of course, we can cure cancer in many cases and things like that. So we have to remember that as well, because the media often doesn't actually report these good things. They just report the bad things because they know that people don't care about the good things. So you don't hear all the hero stories. It would be nice to hear more of those good things that, this person saved 10 lives there. And, look at this breakthrough in science and things like that. But it's mostly just, hundreds of people were murdered by this bomb and this bomb. And we often forget the good stuff.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And so I think this film too is trying not to just say it's all bad news, but yeah, like I said, I guess it was this apprehension I felt when watching this movie, is that, will this translate to most viewers, who are just, passing by and watching that, and isn't that interesting? Okay, it's in a foreign language, so that makes it interesting, and it has this, some very extreme, like you said, like shocking scenes, and the shock value of that, like, for example, that scene where she like beats him up and his face all swollen, and she like, licks the blood. Like, are people there for that kind of thing, or are they really understanding what is trying to be expressed? But of course, you can't control that, unfortunately. So maybe it's also, in a sense, my own vulnerability about things like that, and it being understood, that was causing me to also struggle.
And we have to remember that it's not the film's fault how people see it necessarily. So
yeah, you're right.
if people are ignorant, it's not the fault of Tsukamoto, it's the fault of those people. So
yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true. But it's like that instinct, and it's like that Kotoko instinct, her shutting herself in. I mean, yeah, I felt that. You almost feel like you don't know if you can trust the world and share those things, right? But like you said, it's not your fault if people don't understand that. It's not your fault if people take it that way, and it's not your fault if people just see it as voyeurism. That's always there, I guess, in art. What people are gonna think about or see, or and most likely people who are going to watch this are going to be more sensitive people anyways, because generally the people who should be watching these kinds of things and thinking about it are not going to watch them ever. So that's the whole conundrum always.
Yeah, but at the same time, as Tsukamoto is known for these like crazy transgressive films before this and after it, so many of his kind of regular viewers might be there for the like low budget body horror stuff and things like that. So they might be viewing this film only from that lens, but obviously in general, people who watch this type of cinema, they do think about art more deeply. Not all, but many of them do. So.
Yeah, very interesting. I think I need to see some more of his stuff as well.
And I remember Nazarene Prod, for example, did a long review of this like a couple years ago, and
okay.
it was a good review. He went through all of these, lots of these similar types of things that we talked about as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's visceral, it's powerful, yeah. 100%.
And I think I forgot to say in my introduction that Tsukamoto is actually for me a director who is kind of a hit and miss type of
Okay.
director that, for example, the Snake in June film, I was really hyped about it, but then it was quite disappointing. Same with the film Killing. I know Nazarene and Ronin really love the film Killing, but it's like this type of low-budget handheld samurai film, and I just couldn't get into the aesthetic fully, as I'm so used to like Kobayashi's meticulous compositions and things like that.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
But then this, and then like I said in the beginning, Gemini is another film that I really love from Tsukamoto, and I think that's available in third window as well. So maybe we'll do that next year. So
sure, yeah. I mean, I'm definitely interested in exploring more of his films, and of course some of his well-known as well. With Tetsuo Iron Man and all that. I do understand he is. It's not just like body horror for body horror. Sorry, he is trying. He has a certain unique perspective and thoughts, and he expresses in unique ways, which may not always be my or yours cup of tea, but you do learn by actually thinking about it and discussing it. So, but yeah, I think I enjoyed this discussion. Yeah, I think it was great.
yeah, and I did a reaction to this top 100 greatest Japanese films list by a Japanese film magazine, and they had Tetsuo the Iron Man there. So I think he's
okay.
So the Japanese critics like him as well, I guess.
Yeah.
And of course, Japanese are the best at doing this type of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, we will do more Sono in the podcast, which is really crazy, and maybe we'll do some Takashi Miike at some point.
Okay. Yeah.
Although Miike is one that I'm not a Miike expert as much as I'm a Sono expert, but yeah, maybe we'll do it.
Yeah. I've seen only one Miike, and that was like the remake of Harakiri. It's the only Miike I've seen.
Yeah, the offensive one you've seen. But yeah. Because it's the remake of one of the greatest films of all time.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, funnily
well,
enough,
I was ignorant. I was ignorant at the time. I didn't know there were two Harakiris.
Yeah.
So.
You still need to see this one.
Yeah, I know that's.
I said to you in the pre-chat that I'm feeling guilty that I didn't have it for our schedule this year.
Yeah, but maybe I'll just watch it. Because how long can I wait? It must be done.
Yeah, but this was a great discussion, and again, I'm not angry that you had some problems with the film, but yeah. I mean, if you hated Twin Peaks Fire Walk with me or something like that, then I might get angry, but don't get angry with these kind of regular favorites of mine.
Yeah, I mean, I won't even say like hated or disliked. It's like I said, I get challenged by certain things, and Lynch films are actually films that challenge me. I'm not I watch a Lynch film. Oh yeah, something like Mulholland Drive, like. But generally, I'm tested. Okay, I really, because it's a style that is not automatic for me to connect with. I really need to think about it. What is actually going on? It doesn't always just immediately. Yeah. So.
And it's actually interesting because in our schedule, I think in September we have the film called The Other Side of the Underneath, which is a British film about schizophrenia. So we'll see how you like that one. So it's completely different than this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. Definitely.
But yeah, this was a great discussion, and in the next episode we will talk about another contemporary Japanese film that is completely different to Kotoko. So it's like father, like son. Yeah. But let us know your thoughts about Tsukamoto in general, but also Kotoko and any of the topics that we talked about here, like news media and things like that. But yeah, thanks for watching. Don't drink Coke at all. Sayonara and arigato gozaimashita.